I was the black sheep. At the reading of the will, I got the last laugh. And to my daughter Sloane, the lawyer read, adjusting his glasses, I leave the sum of $1. $1. My brother Callum actually laughed. My sister Whitney smirked behind her hand. My mother, my own mother, looked relieved, like she'd been worried Dad might accidentally leave me something of value. I sat perfectly still in that leather chair, hands folded in my lap, while my family divided up my father's $12 million estate. The mansion in Aspen, the beach house in Florida, the stock portfolio, the classic car collection, the business he'd built from nothing. Everything went to them. The golden children, the ones who'd followed the rules, married the right people, produced the right grandchildren. I got $1 and the satisfaction of knowing my father had gone to his grave thinking he'd won. But here's what none of them knew. Dad didn't just leave me $1. He left me a letter, and that letter contained every dirty secret they'd spent decades hiding. What I did with those secrets, it didn't just destroy their perfect lives. It exposed a fraud that had been running for 30 years and sent 2 of them to prison. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button and drop where you're watching from, because what comes next? Justice served so cold it left frostbite. But that wasn't where it started. My name is Sloane Mercer, and for 31 years, I was the family disappointment. Not because I was a criminal or an addict or a failure. I was disappointing because I refused to be what my father, Lawrence Mercer, demanded I be, a carbon copy of him. Dad built Mercer Logistics from a single delivery truck into a nationwide freight empire. By the time I was born, the youngest of 3 by 7 years, the company was worth millions, and Dad had become the kind of man who measured people by their quarterly earnings and their ability to close deals. My brother Callum was his clone, ruthless, ambitious, obsessed with growth at any cost. He joined the company at 22 and became CFO by 30. My sister Whitney married a corporate lawyer and spent her days hosting charity events that were really just networking opportunities. They were perfect, polished, profitable. I wanted to be a veterinarian. Animals. Dad had said when I told him at 16, you want to waste your intelligence playing with dogs? Veterinary medicine is a real career. It's a hobby for rich people who can afford to make no money. You're a Mercer. You'll join the family business like your siblings. But I didn't. I went to Colorado State for veterinary medicine, paid for it myself with loans and scholarships after Dad refused to fund what he called a waste of education. I graduated, got my license, and opened a small practice in Boulder specializing in rescue animals. I loved it. I was good at it. And I made enough to live comfortably, if not lavishly. My family treated it like I'd joined a cult. Thanksgiving dinners were interrogations. Still playing Dr. Distrays? Whitney would ask, her voice dripping with condescension. Christmas gatherings meant business talk I wasn't included in, conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Family photos showed Callum, Whitney, their spouses and kids, and sometimes me, standing slightly apart, the odd one out. Dad barely spoke to me after I refused to join Mercer Logistics. When he did, it was to remind me that I was throwing away my potential or embarrassing the family name by working with animals instead of building empires. You could have been something, he told me at my 30th birthday dinner, the last time I saw him before he got sick. Instead, you're cleaning up dog shit for a living. I left that dinner early, drove home crying, called my best friend Iris and told her I was done trying to earn his approval. Good, Iris had said. Screw him. You're saving lives every day? What's he doing? Making rich people richer. She was right, but it still hurt. Because no matter how much you tell yourself you don't need a parent's approval, some part of you always wants it. Dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 8 months ago. Stage 4. 6 months to live, maybe less. I heard about it through Whitney's Facebook post, not a phone call. The post had family photos, Dad with Callum and his kids, Dad with Whitney and her husband. None of me. I called anyway. I heard about Dad. Can I visit? I don't think that's a good idea, Whitney said. He's very weak. He doesn't need stress. I'm his daughter. Sloane, please. You've made it clear you don't want to be part of this family. Don't use his illness to suddenly play the caring daughter. She hung up. I sat in my clinic office, staring at the phone, feeling like I'd been punched. I didn't try again. What was the point? I'd spent 30 years being told I wasn't enough. Why would his deathbed be any different? Dad died 3 months later. I found out via text from Callum. Dad passed this morning. Funeral is Saturday. You can come if you want. If I wanted. Like it was optional. Like I wasn't his child too. I went. Stood in the back of the church. Listened to Callum's eulogy about what a great man Dad was. What a brilliant businessman. What a devoted father to his children. Plural, but his eyes never landed on me. After the service, at the reception at Dad's estate, I tried to talk to my mother. She'd always been softer than Dad, more understanding. Maybe she'd finally acknowledge that I mattered too. Mom, I said, approaching her carefully. I know this is hard, but not now, Sloane. She didn't even look at me. I'm greeting guests. I stood there, invisible, while she embraced people who weren't even family. While she laughed at some story someone told about Dad. While she accepted condolences from business associates who'd met him twice. I left without saying goodbye. Nobody noticed. Trust was earned, not given. That's what Dad always said. I didn't realize until much later that he'd never planned to let me earn it. The game was rigged from the start. The will reading was scheduled for 2 weeks after the funeral. I almost didn't go. They're going to humiliate you, Iris warned. Your dad probably left you nothing just to make a point. I know, but I need to see it. I need to close this chapter. The reading was at the family lawyer's office, a place called Thornton and Associates, all dark wood and leather furniture that smelled like money. Callum and Whitney were already there with their spouses, everyone dressed like they were attending a board meeting. Mom sat at the head of the table, composed and dry-eyed. She'd cried at the funeral, but now she was back to being Sloane Mercer, dignified, controlled, unshakable. I took the only remaining seat, at the far end of the table. Nobody greeted me. Callum was on his phone. Whitney was whispering to her husband. The lawyer, Harold Thornton, cleared his throat. Thank you all for coming. I know this is difficult, but Lawrence was very clear about his wishes. Let's begin. He opened a folder and started reading the will. It was exactly what I expected. The business split between Callum and Whitney, the properties divided, the stocks distributed. Mom got the estate and a comfortable trust. Then he got to me. And to my daughter Sloane, who chose a different path, I leave the sum of $1, with the hope that she learns the value of family loyalty. The room went silent. Then Callum laughed, actually laughed out loud. Jesus, Dad really did it, he said, shaking his head. $1. That's cold even for him. Whitney covered her mouth, but I could see her smiling. Mom said nothing, just stared at her hands. I felt my face burning. Not from sadness, from rage. The kind of rage that starts in your stomach and spreads through your whole body like poison. He'd done it. He'd actually reduced my entire existence to a symbolic fuck you in his will. Is there anything else? I asked Thornton, keeping my voice steady. Actually, yes. He pulled out an envelope. Lawrence left sealed letters for each of you, to be opened privately after the reading. He handed them out. Mine was thin, probably just another lecture from beyond the grave about how I'd wasted my potential. If there are no questions, we're concluded, Thornton said. Everyone stood, already talking about dinner plans, about who would take which property, about liquidating assets. I walked out without a word. In my car, I sat with the envelope in my hands for a long time. Part of me wanted to throw it away unread. But I couldn't. I needed to know what he'd said, what final judgment he'd passed. I opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper, handwritten in Dad's shaky cursive from his last weeks. Sloane. By now you know what I left you. It wasn't cruelty, it was protection. What I'm giving your siblings will destroy them. The company is built on fraud. Callum has been embezzling for 5 years. Whitney's charity is a money laundering operation. Your mother knows everything. I couldn't bring myself to expose them while I was alive. But I couldn't let it continue after I'm gone. So I'm leaving it to you. In Safety Deposit Box 447 at First National Bank, you'll find evidence of everything. Financial records, emails, recorded conversations. The key is taped to the back of your grandmother's photo in my study, the one of her holding you as a baby. The only photo of you I kept on my desk. You were the only one who ever had integrity. I'm sorry I punished you for it. Make them answer for what they've done. Dad. I read it 3 times. 4 times. 5. The black sheep letter wasn't an insult. It was an apology. And a weapon. That's when I stopped being the victim and started taking notes. I sat in that parking lot for an hour, just staring at the letter. My hands were shaking. My mind was racing. Dad knew. He'd known about the fraud, the embezzlement, the money laundering, and he'd done nothing. Just let it happen while he was alive, then dumped it on me to clean up after he was dead. Part of me wanted to burn the letter. Let them have their fraudulent empire. Let them destroy themselves without my help. But the bigger part, the part that had spent 30 years being treated like garbage, wanted to watch them burn. I drove to Dad's estate. Mom was still at dinner with Callum and Whitney, probably celebrating their inheritance. The house was empty, dark except for the lights on timers. I still had my key from when I'd lived there as a teenager. I let myself in, feeling like an intruder in my own childhood home. Dad's study was exactly as I remembered. Massive oak desk, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, photos of Callum and Whitney's accomplishments covering every surface. Their college diplomas, their wedding photos, their kids' school pictures. And on the desk, in a small silver frame, one photo of Grandma holding a baby. Me. It was tucked behind a stack of papers, like Dad had hidden it, but couldn't bring himself to remove it entirely. I picked up the frame. My throat tightened. This was the only photo of me he'd kept. Not my graduation, not my license ceremony, not me with my first rescue dog. Just this one, of me as a baby, before I'd disappointed him. I turned the frame over. Taped to the back was a small silver key. Safety deposit box, 447. I took the key and the photo. If this was going to be my inheritance, I'd take the only piece of evidence that Dad had ever loved me too. The bank opened at 9 the next morning. I was there at 8:45, key in hand, letter folded in my pocket. The banker led me to the vault, verified my identity against Dad's paperwork. Apparently, I was listed as the authorized accessor, added just 3 weeks before he died, and left me alone with box 447. Inside was a treasure trove of evidence. Financial records showing Callum had been siphoning money from Mercer Logistics for 5 years. Not small amounts, millions of dollars, moved through shell companies, fake vendors, inflated invoices. He'd been systematically bleeding the company dry while telling the board everything was fine. Emails between Whitney and her husband discussing their charity foundation, which raised money for children's hospitals but only donated 10%. The rest went into their personal accounts, laundered through administrative costs and consulting fees. Bank statements for offshore accounts in Mom's name. She'd been helping them hide the money, signing documents, creating paper trails that covered their tracks. And recordings. Dad had secretly recorded conversations with all of them, probably from his last months when he knew he was dying. Callum bragging about his schemes. Whitney laughing about donors who thought they were helping sick kids. Mom coldly discussing how to structure the fraud to avoid detection. My father had documented everything, built an entire case file, and left it for me to decide what to do with. There was one more item in the box, a flash drive labeled for Sloane. Play this first. I took everything home, spread it across my dining table, stared at it for hours. Then I plugged in the flash drive. Dad's face appeared on screen, gaunt and gray from the cancer, sitting in his study. This had been recorded maybe a week before he died. Sloane, he said, his voice weak. If you're watching this, I'm gone. And you found what I left you. He coughed, pain flickering across his face. I was a terrible father to you. I know that. I punished you for having principles I should have admired. I made you feel worthless because you wouldn't compromise your integrity for money. And I'm sorry. Tears started running down my cheeks. Your siblings learned from me. They learned that money matters more than honesty, that success justifies any method, that family loyalty means protecting each other's crimes. I created them, and now they're destroying everything I built. He leaned toward the camera. I'm giving you a choice. You can expose them, bring them to justice, and probably tear apart what's left of this family. Or you can destroy this evidence and let them continue. Either way, I'm leaving it in your hands. The only person I trust to do the right thing. The video ended. I sat in the dark, crying, holding the photo of Grandma and baby me. Dad had finally given me what I'd always wanted. His trust, his respect, his acknowledgement that I mattered. But he'd done it by making me responsible for destroying my own family. I didn't sleep that night. Just sat at my dining table, surrounded by evidence of my family's crimes, trying to decide what kind of person I wanted to be. The easy choice was to destroy everything. Burn it, delete it, pretend I'd never found it. Let Callum and Whitney have their fraudulent empire. Move on with my life and never look back. But that would make me complicit. It would mean Dad died thinking I was strong enough to do what he couldn't, and I'd proven him wrong. The hard choice was to expose them. Turn over the evidence to the authorities. Watch my family go to prison. Become the person who destroyed the Mercer name. I called Iris at 3 a.m. She answered on the second ring, groggy but alert. Sloane? What's wrong? I told her everything. The letter, the evidence, the video, the choice. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then, what do you want to do? I don't know. They're my family. They treated you like garbage for 30 years. They laughed when you got left $1. Do they deserve your protection? No. But exposing them means destroying Mom too. She knew everything. Your mom stood by while they humiliated you. She chose them over you every single time. Why are you still protecting her? She was right. I'd spent my entire life making excuses for them, trying to understand their perspective, hoping they'd eventually see my worth. And they never had. I need to be smart about this, I said. If I just hand everything to the police, they'll close ranks. Hire expensive lawyers. Drag it out for years. So what's the plan? I looked at the evidence spread across my table. Financial records. Emails. Recorded confessions. Everything needed to build an airtight case. I document everything. I organize it professionally. And I find a prosecutor who specializes in white-collar crime. Someone who will see this as a career-making case, not a rich family scandal to be negotiated away. Over the next 2 weeks, I became obsessed. I took time off from the clinic, telling my staff I needed to handle Dad's estate, which wasn't technically a lie. I organized every document chronologically. I created spreadsheets tracking money flows. I transcribed every recording. I built a timeline showing exactly when each crime occurred, who was involved, and how they'd covered it up. The embezzlement alone totaled $8 million. The charity fraud was another $3 million, and Mom's offshore accounts held another $12 million in hidden assets. Money that should have been reported to the IRS but had been laundered through fake business expenses. This wasn't just fraud. This was organized financial crime on a massive scale. I found a prosecutor through a former client, a lawyer who'd brought her dog in for emergency surgery. Her name was Heather Donovan, and she worked for the State Attorney General's office in the Economic Crimes Division. I called her directly. I have evidence of a long-term fraud scheme involving embezzlement, charity fraud, and tax evasion. Multiple perpetrators, over $20 million. Are you interested? She was in my living room within 2 hours. Heather reviewed everything I had, her expression growing more intense with each document. After 3 hours, she looked up at me with something like awe. This is the most comprehensive evidence package I've ever seen from a civilian. You could work for the FBI. I'm a veterinarian. I'm just good at organizing information. You're better than good. This is prosecutable. Highly prosecutable. She paused. You understand what will happen when we move forward? Your family will be arrested. This will be very public. Your name will be attached to it. I know. And you're sure you want to do this? I thought about Dad's letter. About the $1. About 30 years of being invisible. They made their choices, I said. Now they get to face the consequences. What I didn't tell Heather was that I had one more plan. A final confrontation before the arrests. Because I wanted them to know it was me. I wanted them to understand that the black sheep they dismissed had taken them down. I was building a case. But I didn't realize I was also building something else. The strength to stop seeking approval from people who would never give it. The family dinner was Mom's idea. 2 months after the will reading, she called me for the first time since the funeral. Sloane, I think we should all get together. Clear the air. You're still part of this family, even if things have been difficult. I almost laughed. They'd ignored me for months, and now suddenly they wanted family bonding? Something had shifted. Maybe Callum was getting nervous. Maybe Whitney had noticed discrepancies in the company accounts. Or maybe they'd finally realized that I had access to Dad's estate and were worried about what I might have found. Okay, I said. When? Saturday night. My place. Just family. We'll have a nice dinner. Talk about moving forward. Saturday. That gave me 4 days to coordinate with Heather. The arrests were scheduled for Monday morning, pending final warrant approvals. This dinner would be my last chance to face them before their world collapsed. I showed up at Mom's house, the estate that should have been partly mine, but that Dad had left entirely to her, carrying nothing but my phone. I'd set it to record audio in my pocket. Everything they said would be documented. Callum and Whitney were already there with their spouses, everyone dressed casually. Drinking wine in the living room like this was a normal family gathering. Sloane, Mom said, hugging me stiffly. I'm so glad you came. Wouldn't miss it, I said. We sat down to dinner. Pot roast, Dad's favorite, which felt like some kind of morbid tribute. The conversation was awkward at first, everyone dancing around the obvious tension. Then Callum cleared his throat. "So, Sloane, have you been going through Dad's things?" "From the estate." There it was. "They were fishing." "A bit," I said carefully. "Why?" "Just curious." "Dad kept a lot of documents. Business papers. We want to make sure nothing important got overlooked." "Important like what?" Callum and Whitney exchanged a glance. Mom suddenly became very interested in her plate. "Like financial records," Whitney said. "Dad was meticulous about documenting everything. We just want to make sure we have all the company files." "For the transition," Callum added quickly. "Now that I'm running things permanently." I took a sip of wine, letting the silence stretch. They were panicking. They knew Dad had documented their crimes, and they were trying to figure out if I'd found the evidence. "I did find some financial records," I said finally. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Oh." Callum's voice was too casual. "Anything interesting?" "Very interesting, actually. Records of shell companies, offshore accounts, fake charitable donations. Really fascinating stuff." Whitney's face went pale. Callum's jaw tightened. Mom set down her fork with a soft clink. "Sloane," Mom said carefully, "I don't know what you think you found, but I found everything, Mom. Every email, every transfer, every recording. Dad documented your entire operation for 5 years." The silence was deafening. Then Callum laughed, but it sounded forced. "Sloane, you're being dramatic. Those are legitimate business." "Callum, you've stolen $8 million from the company." "Whitney, your charity has defrauded donors out of $3 million. "Mom, you have $12 million in undeclared offshore accounts." "Should I keep going?" "You don't know what you're talking about," Whitney snapped. "I know exactly what I'm talking about. And so do the prosecutors I've been working with for the past 2 months." The room exploded. Everyone talking at once, voices rising, accusations flying. "You vindictive bitch. After everything this family has done for you. Dad would be ashamed." I stood up calmly, silencing them. "Dad left me those records. He left me a letter telling me to expose you. He knew what you were doing, and he couldn't stop you while he was alive. So he gave me the tools to stop you after he was gone." Mom stood up, her composure finally cracking. "Sloane, please. Think about what you're doing. If you expose this, you'll destroy the family. Is that what you want?" "I wanted a family that valued me. I wanted parents who were proud of me. I wanted siblings who didn't treat me like garbage. You chose not to give me those things. So no, Mom. I don't care about protecting the family that never protected me." Callum took a step toward me, his face red. "You self-righteous little. Touch me, and I'll add assault to your charges," I said coldly. He stopped. I picked up my purse, the phone still recording in my pocket. "The arrests are Monday morning. I'd recommend getting lawyers. Good ones. You're going to need them." I walked out of that house for the last time. Behind me, I heard someone scream. Someone else was crying. Someone threw something that shattered against a wall. I didn't look back. I got in my car, drove home, and sent the dinner recording to Heather with a note. Additional evidence of consciousness of guilt. She replied immediately. "Perfect. We're greenlit for Monday. Thank you for your courage." Courage. Dad had said I was the only one with integrity. Heather said I had courage. Maybe they were right. Or maybe I was just finally tired of being invisible. The arrests happened exactly as planned. Monday morning, 6 a.m., federal agents and state police executed simultaneous raids on Callum's house, Whitney's house, and Mom's estate. They seized computers, financial records, phones, everything needed to build the prosecution's case. By 9 a.m., all 3 were in custody. By noon, the story had broken nationally. Logistics empire founders' children arrested in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. Family business scandal, embezzlement, charity fraud exposed after death of patriarch. The news coverage was brutal. Photos of Callum and Whitney in handcuffs. Reporters camped outside Mom's estate. Financial analysts explaining how the fraud had worked. Charity watchdog organizations expressing outrage about Whitney's foundation. And in every article, the same detail. The scheme was exposed by Sloane Mercer's youngest daughter, who came forward with extensive evidence her father had compiled before his death. My phone exploded. Reporters requesting interviews. Old friends and extended family calling to either support me or condemn me. Social media erupting with hot takes about family loyalty versus doing the right thing. I ignored all of it. Turned off my phone closed my clinic for the week, and stayed home with my dogs. But I did watch the arraignment. Sat in the courtroom gallery, hood up, sunglasses on, while my family faced the judge. Callum's lawyer argued for bail. My client is a respected businessman with deep community ties. He's not a flight risk. Heather Donovan stood up, ice cold and professional. Your Honor, the defendant has 12 offshore accounts in 3 countries and a documented history of moving money internationally. He is absolutely a flight risk. The state requests remand. The judge agreed. Bail set at $5 million cash. Whitney's lawyer tried the same argument. My client is a mother of 3 with no criminal history. She should be released on her own recognizance. Heather again. The defendant operated a fraudulent charity that exploited donors' goodwill to line her own pockets. She showed a calculated willingness to deceive for years. The state requests bail of $3 million. Granted. Mom's lawyer went for sympathy. Your Honor, Mrs. Mercer is a 68-year-old widow still grieving her husband. House arrest with monitoring would be more appropriate than incarceration. Mrs. Mercer has the most sophisticated money laundering operation of the 3 defendants, Heather countered. She has the means and international connections to disappear. The state requests remand with bail set at $8 million. The judge looked at Mom over his glasses. Mrs. Mercer, you facilitated your children's crimes and actively helped conceal assets from federal authorities. Bail is set at $8 million cash. Next case. None of them could make bail immediately. They were remanded to county jail pending trial. I left the courthouse before they were led away. I didn't need to see that part. I just needed to know that justice was moving forward. The media wanted to paint me as either a hero or a traitor, depending on the outlet. Conservative news praised me for exposing fraud and corruption. Liberal news focused on the human cost, the family destruction, the complicated ethics of turning in your own mother. I didn't care about the narrative. I cared about one thing. Dad had been right to trust me with this. The real satisfaction came 3 days later when I received a call from the board of directors of Mercer Logistics. Ms. Mercer, the chairman said, in light of recent events, we're conducting a full forensic audit of the company. We'd like to invite you to join an advisory committee overseeing the restructuring. Your father spoke highly of your integrity in his final months, and we believe you could help restore trust in the Mercer name. Me. The black sheep. The disappointment. The one who'd been excluded from every business conversation my entire life. They wanted my help to save Dad's company. I'm not a business person, I said. You're the only Mercer who isn't a criminal, he replied bluntly. That makes you exactly what we need. I accepted, not because I wanted to run a logistics empire, but because it meant Dad's legacy wouldn't be defined by Callum and Whitney's greed. It would be rebuilt by the daughter he'd finally trusted. The trial took 8 months to reach court. During that time, the full scope of the fraud became public. Callum had been embezzling since Dad promoted him to CFO. He'd created fake vendors, approved inflated invoices to shell companies he controlled, and systematically siphoned money out of Mercer Logistics. The company's actual profits were 30% higher than reported. Callum had been stealing the difference. Whitney's charity had raised $18 million over 10 years. Only $2 million had gone to actual charitable causes. The rest had been laundered through administrative costs that were really just payments to Whitney, her husband, and various family members on the payroll doing non-existent jobs. Mom had orchestrated the cover-up. She'd created offshore accounts, filed false tax returns, and used her legitimate real estate investments as vehicles to launder the stolen money back into the U.S. economy. It was sophisticated, organized, and completely illegal. The prosecution offered plea deals. Callum and Whitney both refused, convinced their expensive lawyers could create reasonable doubt. Mom, facing the most serious charges, took the deal, testify against her children in exchange for a reduced sentence. The family imploded in spectacular fashion. Callum and Whitney hired different law firms who immediately started blaming each other for the schemes. Mom's testimony painted them as the masterminds while she was just a reluctant accomplice trying to hold the family together after Dad's death. None of it was true. The evidence showed she'd been involved from the beginning. But her testimony was damning enough that Callum's lawyer tried to paint her as the real criminal, manipulating her grieving children. The jury didn't buy it. Callum was convicted on 14 counts: embezzlement, wire fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. Sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution of $8 million. Whitney was convicted on 9 counts: charity fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. Sentenced to 8 years and ordered to pay restitution of $3 million plus penalties. Mom, who'd taken the plea deal, was sentenced to 5 years with possibility of parole after 3. The financial reckoning was equally severe. All 3 had to liquidate assets to pay restitution. The houses, the cars, the investment accounts, everything was seized. Whitney's kids' college funds were protected, but barely. Callum's wife filed for divorce and took half of what remained. The Mercer family wealth, built over 40 years, was essentially destroyed in 18 months. But here's the part that gave me the most satisfaction. The victims got made whole. The charity donors were refunded their donations through a settlement fund. Mercer Logistics recovered the embezzled money and was able to restructure without laying off employees. The IRS collected back taxes and penalties that would fund public services. The harm was undone. Not perfectly. You can't give people back the years they believed they were helping sick children only to learn they'd been scammed. But financially, at least, justice was served. I was in the courtroom for all 3 sentencings. Callum saw me and mouthed something I couldn't hear, probably a curse. Whitney cried through her entire sentencing, begging the judge for mercy for her children's sake. Mom looked at me once, her expression unreadable, then looked away. Last week, a young woman came into my practice with a severely injured cat she'd found on the highway. No money, no insurance, just desperation to save this animal's life. I treated the cat for free. Surgery, medication, follow-up care. Everything. Why? She asked, crying with gratitude. Why would you do this for a stranger? Because someone has to, I said. Because doing the right thing isn't about what you get back. It's about who you are when nobody's watching. She thanked me a dozen times. Promised to pay it forward someday. After she left, I thought about Dad's letter. About the choice he'd given me. About the cost of integrity and whether it had been worth it. I'd destroyed my family to expose the truth. I'd sent my mother and siblings to prison. I'd spent 2 years in therapy processing the trauma of being the whistleblower, the family pariah, the black sheep who'd burned down the barn. But I'd also saved Dad's company. I'd returned money to fraud victims. I'd set a precedent that family loyalty doesn't mean protecting criminals. And I'd proven to myself that I was exactly who I'd always believed I was. Someone who chose right over easy every single time. The dollar Dad left me wasn't an insult. It was a test. He wanted to know if I'd trade my integrity for inheritance, if I'd stay silent to claim my share of the fraudulent empire. I'd passed. And the real inheritance, his trust, his respect, his final act of faith in me, was worth more than $12 million ever could have been. You can fake a lot of things. You can fake success, family unity, even love. But you can't fake justice. And you can't fake being the kind of person who chooses it, no matter the cost. I'm Sloane Mercer. I was the black sheep. And at the reading of the will, I got the last laugh, not because I inherited wealth, but because I inherited the one thing my family never had. A clear conscience. Justice always finds its way. I'm Zach, and this was another true tale of revenge. You think that was wild? Wait till you hear what happened when a man discovered his business partner was secretly his wife's lover and had been stealing from him for years. That story's coming next week. What would you have done in Sloane's place? Would you have exposed your family or protected them? Comment below. I read every one.